the computer. Okay, I'm Maia Werner-Avidon, and I'm the Manager of Research and Evaluation here at the Asian Art Museum. And I wasn't going to say anything about the Asian Art Museum, but this is a new position for the museum. I've been here about a year, and so we just started doing in-house evaluation about a year ago. And I'm hoping you guys will all come and see our prototyping gallery, which we're going to have up for about 4 months, where we're testing some different ideas, things that we'd like to incorporate into our permanent collection. We're kind of seeing how they work with visitors first before we do that. So I'm going to be providing you with a short introduction to evaluation. We'll talk a little bit about evaluation basics, what it is, when do we do it, how does it fit into an overall project development timeline, and then I'm going to talk about different types of evaluation methods that you could employ and discuss some pros and cons of each of those types of methods. So what is evaluation and why should we do it? This is a description of evaluation that we borrowed from some materials developed by Chris Parsons, who runs a consulting firm called WordCraft. And it highlights some of the things that are important to think about related to evaluation. So some of the key ideas here are that evaluation is systematic. It is information that is collected in a consistent manner, using the same instruments and the same procedures each time. There's some variation, you don't have to use the exact same interview questions, for example. There's flexibility, but in general, kind of that you're trying to do things, collect the information in a systematic way. It's designed to examine specific outcomes, so you really want to identify what are the things that you want to learn, what are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, related to knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, skills. And it's related to a specific experience, so we want to be looking directly at the impact of a specific program or a specific exhibition. And again, I think its largest purpose is to help us improve our programs, to make things better, but also to learn about how effective they were. So these are a range of different types of evaluation that you might want to conduct. So front-end evaluation is typically conducted at the beginning of a project, and this is when you're trying to understand what does your audience know, what are they interested in, what are their needs. And here at the Asian Art Museum, we do a lot of front-end evaluation when we're planning for upcoming special exhibitions. So we spend time, and some people here have conducted those evaluations for me. But we spend time asking our visitors, what do they know about this topic? Which of the themes that we're considering incorporating in the exhibition are interesting to them? Which objects are compelling to them? And then we use that information to plan our interpretation and our marketing for the exhibition. Formative evaluation is conducted as the project is being developed, and that's what you're going to see today when you go to our prototyping gallery. So this includes kind of testing particular activities to make sure that the instructions are clear. Do they work for visitors? Can visitors do them as they're intended? And as I said, if you go to our prototyping gallery later, you'll be able to see what we've been doing. We have mock-ups in there of real experiences that we're hoping to install in our permanent collection, and we're testing them out to see how they work. Remedial evaluation is conducted after a program has been completed, but kind of in the early phases of that, to try to identify small tweaks that can be made to refine things, to make things work better. So you might be looking for things there that, minor modifications that you can make to activity instructions and things like that. Summative evaluation is typically conducted after a project's complete and is being implemented, and that's really where you're looking for the impact. You want to understand, did your project meet its goal? What was its impact? And this is a chart, this is also from Chris Parsons too, that kind of shows the program development model, and then where these different types of evaluation might fit in as you're developing a program. So here's a few things to think about when designing your evaluation, and as Lindsay said, there's some worksheets that you're going to be filling out a little bit later in the program today to kind of help you think through some of these things for yourself as you're thinking about what your evaluation is going to be. So things you want to think about are, why are you conducting this evaluation? Are you using it for planning purposes? Are you trying to improve an experience? Do you need to let a funder know what the impact was, whether your program achieved its goal? So you need to think about what the purpose is and who's this going to be going to. Is it for an internal audience or an external audience? And that might affect the level of evaluation that you do and who conducts it. Obviously, it's very important to think about identify your outcomes and really to think about what is reasonable to achieve given the constraints of the experience that you offer. And I'm going to be talking a little more about specific outcomes on the next slide. But the question you want to ask yourself there is what will show us that we met our goal? What's the evidence that we're looking for that will help us understand that we met our goal? You also need to think about your audience. As museums, we serve a lot of different audiences. We have public audiences, but we may be targeting specific audiences within that broader. So we may be looking at children, we might be looking at young adults, we might be looking at families, seniors. There's a lot of different types of audiences that we could be looking at, and that's also going to impact the evaluation choices that we make. There's also school audiences, which includes both students and teachers. Once you've identified your outcomes from your specific audience, then you can think about the best methods to document those outcomes. And again, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in more detail in just a few slides. And then it's important to think about the logistics of the study. So when you're thinking about what's a reasonable sample size, what's your budget, who's going to collect this data? Do we have staff who can do this? Are we looking for volunteers? What's going to be the timeline for it? And there's a difference in what's needed in those different areas depending on what you're studying. So with prototyping, for example, you can learn a huge amount from a very small number of people. You can watch 10 people interact with a prototype and you can find out that some problem is occurring very easily. So you can do these, the range of sample size that you need is very variable depending on what type of evaluation you're doing and what you're trying to find out. For summative evaluation, you might want a larger sample size. And there's lots of things, rules of thumbs about what's the right sample size that you can find on the internet, but it's really important to remember that we are always limited by time and money. So just make your sample size as large as you can, given those other constraints. We have to be realistic about what we can accomplish. So moving on, this is thinking about outcomes. This chart is based on the National Science Foundation's framework for evaluating impacts of informal science education projects. And it shows the different outcome categories that NSF believes can be impacted by informal science education programs. Although NSF intended these to be science-specific, I believe they're really very broadly applicable and really can be applied to a wide range of different types of museum experiences. So this includes knowledge, what do our participants know, what can they actually state that they've learned about something, engagement and interest, how engaged are they in the moment, what emotions are they expressing as they engage in the activity, you know, are they interested in this activity, are they interested in this topic, this career. Attitude is looking more at long-term perspectives, so this might be looking at attitudes about the environment or attitudes about scientists, things like that. Behavior, again, is more long-term, so can we change people's long-term behavior after the experience? Can we get visitors to use less water or to do some other pro-environmental behavior? For skills, this might be teaching people how to do something that they didn't previously know how to do. So it could be increased skills, where we're strengthening their skills in doing observation or prediction or experimentation. Or it could be like, I actually learned how to use a microscope through this project. So many of my examples are science-based due to my background, but again, these are categories that can be broadly applied to almost any type of museum. And NSF also has another category which covers everything else that you might want to evaluate. So now I just want to talk a little bit more about methods of evaluation, and I want to start a little bit just talking about informal methods that you can use to gather data. These are things like comment cards, response books, that type of thing. It's probably the easiest method to implement, but also the least rigorous. So the issue with this is that the respondents are self-selected. So people who feel strongly one way or another, positively or negatively, are more likely to comment on your comment cards than those that have a neutral response. But it's still a way of collecting data and getting a sense of what's happening. You know, which are there parts of this experience that we might want to evaluate more deeply? Are there things that are coming up on the comment cards that we want to look into more systematically or more rigorously? So this picture is actually from our prototyping gallery, and we're using Post-it notes to get visitor data, because we can't always have an evaluator in there. We are also doing observations and focus groups and other methods as well. But we're also just asking visitors to write on a Post-it note what they think worked well, what they think didn't, and what other things they want to tell us about. And we also have kind of a more general sign which says, like, what else would you like to see us do? What objects in the museum are of interest to you? What themes would you like to see us explore more deeply? This is another example of an informal approach. This is from the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. At an evening event, they have a photo booth where visitors can take photos of themselves with a chalkboard with prompts that read, I made, I met, I loved, I learned. And again, this is just a way to collect information from visitors in a way that's fun. It doesn't feel like a test. And although it's less systematic in the data collection, you can actually analyze the data in a systematic way that really enables you to get a sense of what's working well or not working for visitors. Moving on to more formal approaches, surveys are a very common method that people use in evaluation. You can use pre and post surveys to gather information about knowledge gain as a result, or before and after an experience. You can also assess attitude changes, engagement. You can measure satisfaction with the experience. And surveys are good because they're easy to use to gather a lot of data. They're pretty cost effective. And there's lots of survey creation tools available. Lindsay sent you a survey before we planned this workshop, and she used Google Forms, which is completely free. There's also very many low-cost online survey platforms that SurveyMonkey has plans for as low as $20 a month, so there's a lot of options there that are pretty cost-effective. And they can also be administered via paper. And you can collect quantitative and qualitative data using multiple choice or open-ended items. There's limitations of surveys in terms of reaching people for whom there may be more communication challenges, so there's issues with age. It's difficult to do surveys with young children, literacy level, language, and you need to be careful with surveys not to make them too long. Respondents get tired, will abandon a survey in the middle. And then they have less depth of information compared to some of the other approaches that you might try. Another commonly used evaluation method is interviews or focus groups. Compared to surveys, these allow you to get more detailed, more in-depth, more qualitative data. And they provide a lot of contextual information to data that you might be collecting from other sources. These are time-consuming, especially if you're going to transcribe and analyze open-ended data. It's very time-consuming to do. And you typically reach a more limited number of individuals than you might be able to with a survey. And then in focus groups, there's always a risk as well of the participants influencing one another, so something to think about. And you need to feel good and confident in your interviewing techniques, your ability to make people feel comfortable, to ask open-ended questions, to be flexible, to kind of go with the flow as you're doing the interview. Visitor observations can be done in a lot of different ways at different scales. This image is showing the results of a large-scale timing and tracking study that was done here at the museum. It was before I started working here. But the people who did this study tracked visitors over their whole visit and collected data on which galleries they entered and how much time they spent in each gallery. So this is showing the percent of visitors entering each gallery on the first floor. And so this was a very large-scale project. It was time-intensive. We followed visitors for up to 4 hours. But observations can also be used to do much more small-scale, focused observations as part of looking at a single exhibit component. And this is kind of what we're doing in our prototyping gallery. We will be doing observations of visitors interacting with our prototypes, followed by a short interview. And we're looking for things like how long do visitors spend, which parts of an experience do they engage with, and which parts do they not engage with, which things look to be confusing to them, what's not working well for them. And again, for this type of experience, you could also look for things like engagement level, affect, whether the experience was facilitated or not. And you can, as I said before, you can really learn a lot about what's working well or not working well from really a very small sample of visitors. And again, the information that you come away with through observation may be really different from what you learn from other evaluation methods. So in our last round of prototyping, we had focus groups, and we directed the visitors which aspects of the experience we wanted them to engage with, and the visitors through our focus groups loved using these magnifying glasses to look at the artwork. That's like their favorite thing. And then we did the observations of the same prototypes, and almost no visitors touched the magnifying glasses. And after we talked to them, we realized that they couldn't actually see them. So the location that they were hung at was not noticeable to the visitors, or they didn't know what they were. So they saw them hanging on the wall, but they didn't actually realize that they were magnifying glasses. So the observation really added a lot of data that we weren't getting from the focus groups that allowed us to make really simple changes to be able to say, hey, we need to hang these a little bit higher so that people notice them, and maybe add a label that says magnifying glass. So these are really a reliable indicator of what people are doing at your exhibits. It may be more reliable than asking them. And the other thing that's good about observation is that it doesn't really take away from the visitor experience. So you're not impacting the experience that they're having at the museum. They can be time consuming and cost intensive. It requires training of your observers to kind of make sure that they're all collecting data in the same way. But again, for formative evaluation in particular, you can do this type of observation quickly and on a small scale and get a lot of really useful information. And then the last thing I want to talk about are some other methods that can be used to assess outcomes that are a little bit more creative, non-traditional, maybe a little more fun. But they do take more time to analyze to determine what the outcomes are. So this is a card sort. This actually is a project that Lindsay did at the California Academy of Sciences. And she gave, essentially with a card sort, you give the participants cards with words or pictures on them and ask them to sort them in a way that makes sense to them. So this is a project Lindsay did at the Academy of Sciences to understand what kids knew about the carbon cycle. And they got cards labeled with the names of different things that play a role in the carbon cycle, and then the kids worked in small groups to create posters that showed the connections or relationships between these things. So you could do this type of thing as part of a planning for an exhibition, or you could also do it kind of at the end to understand, did visitors come away with the main ideas that we were interested in getting across to them. There's lots of other designed experiences, types of designed experiences you can do, like concept mapping. You can analyze drawings. I'm familiar with a study that asks kids to draw a picture of an animal in its habitat before visiting a zoo and after visiting a zoo. You can ask visitors to take photographs of things that were meaningful to them in their museums. There's a lot of different things to experiment with and try in terms of different activities that you can have your visitors engage with to gather data. And then the last thing, I think Lindsay's also putting this on the Google Drive too, but I wanted to, these are some resources that I think are good resources. Where's my book? So this is a book that I have here that's specific to evaluation in museums. If you're interested in taking a look at it, come see me. I'm happy to show it to you. Practical Evaluation Guide, Tools for Museums and Other Informal Education Settings. The National Science Foundation and the Institute for Museum and Library Services both have evaluation guides available online. And informalscience.org, if you haven't been, it's a great website. They post evaluation reports. So I always, when I'm starting an evaluation, go look and see what other people have done on a similar thing that I'm looking for. So that's a really great resource to be able to go and see what other evaluations people are doing on the same topic or the same type of program or with the same goals. And then the Visitor Studies Association, I want to give a plug for, is a professional organization for people who do evaluation or research in informal settings. They have a great listserv, and you don't need to be a member of VSA to go on the listserv, so you can go there and post your questions and people respond and give you different ideas about evaluation. And then they also have a good annual conference, and if you're interested in presenting something for that, the deadline is next week. So I think that's it. Lindsay wanted me to say what later on during the Choose Your Own Adventure part, what thing I might be able to help you with, and I would love to talk about prototyping if you guys are interested in prototyping. I can also help with lots of other things as well too. Thanks.
All All right, so next up we have a wonderful team of people that collaborated on an exhibit called Operation Babylift. We have a couple of people from the Adoption Museum Project and a couple of people from the Presidio Trust, and I don't know what order you're going in. Laura's gonna start us off.
Hi, so I am Laura Callan, and I'm the director of the Adoption Museum Project, and I also co-curated the exhibition that we're going to talk about today, Operation Babylift, Perspectives and Legacies, and it was really an incredible honor to co-curate that with the Presidio Trust, and we're all really excited to share our work with you today and to learn with you, because none of us are professional evaluators. So what we're going to share is the work that we're doing and that we're learning as we go. So we're really interested in your questions and feedback, although I think that's going to happen at the end. So I am here with three other folks. Liz Evinger, who's the co-curator of the exhibition on the Presidio Trust side, and she's also the curator at the Presidio Trust. Winona Nelson is an intern with the Presidio Trust, and Lacey Lieberthal, a student at JFK, and an intern with the Adoption Museum Project. So this is a really collaborative effort. So we're going to present a case study of 2 evaluation projects for this exhibition, and the exhibition is currently on view. It runs through April 3rd at the Presidio. Both of these evaluation projects are in progress right now. They are also, as I said, completely DIY. So I want to tell you just a little bit more about the partnership to give you some context. So the exhibition has been a really deep partnership from inception through present day. We still work together on a few different components. An Adoption Museum Project, we are working to create the first museum that will explore the topic of adoption, and we're doing that for the purpose of creating social change. And the Presidio Trust is an innovative federal agency that was created to save the Presidio and transform it for a new national purpose. And Liz is going to tell you more about that. So the story, really briefly, is that the Presidio Trust decided they wanted to create an exhibition about this topic, a historic event. We'll tell you more about that as well. And they wanted to put this exhibition in a new building that they were opening, the Presidio Officers Club. And they were, again, it was a wonderful opportunity, invited us to co-curate, and that our focus would be how to hold the part of this story, a central part of the story that is about adoption. So that was the part that we were going to bring in and focus on. So today, we're going to give you a really quick tour of the exhibition, and then we're going to get to the 2 projects. So there's a timing and tracking study, and there's also an analysis of reflection cards that are being written by visitors and hung in the gallery. And it has been mentioned a couple of times already, there are a number of documents connected to our presentation that are in the share drive that you guys can go and take a look at afterwards. And so now I'm going to ask Liz to come up and take you guys through the exhibition.
All right. Thanks, Laura, for that great introduction, both to our presentation today, but also to our partnership and to the exhibition. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the exhibition, both the development process, and give you a very quick gallery tour or virtual tour so you have some context for the 2 evaluation projects that we're working on. As Laura mentioned, the Trust reopened the Presidio Officers Club, a historic building at the heart of the Presidio, last year in October of 2015. And in addition to our permanent exhibition space, we do have a special exhibition gallery that is designed to explore the Presidio's heritage and allow fresh perspectives and a deeper exploration of the topics and themes presented in the permanent exhibition. And these special exhibitions explore how and why the past matters and aim to inspire civic engagement, encouraging visitors to examine the ways in which the Presidio's heritage is relevant today. So with that context, I'm going to give a brief overview of Operation Babylift and the development of the exhibition. The Operation Babylift Perspectives and Legacies exhibition explores the diverse experiences and lasting impacts of a dramatic airlift. It removed more than 2,000 Vietnamese children from their war-torn country to be adopted by American families in April of 1975 in the final chaotic weeks of the war. That extraordinary story continued at the Presidio, where more than 1,500 of these children were transferred before being placed with adoptive families. As more than 5,400 volunteers in the San Francisco Bay Area cared for the children, Operation Babylift itself was being debated across the country. The development of the exhibition was, as Laura mentioned, highly collaborative, a community-based process that unfolded over the course of a year. The process was rooted in key values and practices: dialogue, honesty, compassion, and respect for diverse perspectives and multiple truths. During concept development, we developed an approach to the exhibition using a central question to provide focus to content and design development about dialogue. And so the question was, can dialogue act as a bridge across differences? And we felt that that held a couple of things really well, and that idea of diverse perspectives, of multiple perspectives, and of multiple truths. The community engagement process included working with more than 40 community members who were connected in a variety of different ways to the historic event. That's Vietnamese adoptees, adoption agency workers, military and medical volunteers, Vietnam veterans, adoptive parents, people who contested the airlift, and Vietnamese Americans. By engaging in dialogue with these community members, we as curators were able to explore different perspectives, different experiences, different memories, and different understandings of the events. And community members were involved from the earliest concept exploration all the way to contributing ideas, artifacts, and stories that are on display in the final gallery. Also, as part of the concept development phase, we identified a series shown here of desired visitor outcomes, or stated another way, of visitor experience goals. I'm not going to read this verbatim, but the bold words were some of the key concepts that we were interested in summative evaluation in testing what the impact was. So that's understanding of the historic event of Operation Babylift, looking at reflection and dialogue, looking at empathy, and looking at action. So a very quick tour, and then we'll talk about tracking and timing. There is an introduction to the exhibition. It's a curatorial statement, information about the community engagement process. And I'd like to also point out that the exhibit is bilingual in Vietnamese and in English. There's a section that is devoted to historical context, focusing on the events of April 1975, and it has a couple of media-based interactives. The heart of the exhibition, both conceptually and physically, is dialogue. We recorded 6 dialogues in conjunction with StoryCorps, and there were conversations between somebody who was an adult in 1975, many different kinds of connections, active duty, military, veterans, medical personnel, between somebody who was an adult and somebody who was adopted and is now an adult. And so those conversations form the heart of the exhibition. Then there's a section, a very small section, with historic objects related to Babylift. And here we're interested in exploring the idea that a single object can hold multiple interpretations, the way a single historic event can hold multiple meanings. So here there's a curatorial label alongside 3 to 4 labels each written by a member of the community. And last but not least, there's a section called Reflections, where visitors are invited to respond to a series of prompts to share their memories or personal stories, to ask questions, to start conversations. And those cards get placed on the wall and really create an artifact into themselves. So that's a very quick overview. And we're going to turn now to timing and tracking. Winona, do you want to come up? So one of the two summative evaluation studies that we're doing is a timing and tracking or visitor observation study. I'm going to give a little bit of context before turning it over to Winona to talk about the nuts and bolts. Some of the goals specific to this study were to systematically observe and record visitors' use of the exhibition space. In particular, we were interested in getting an understanding of the actual visitor experience of the exhibition versus our curatorial intentions. We really see this study as providing groundwork for other evaluation, for example, the reflection card analysis that you'll hear about from Laura and Lacey. And for the Trust, as a relatively newcomer to the block, this is our first summative evaluation we've done. It was a chance to develop tools, process, methods that we could easily adapt to other special exhibitions and to our permanent exhibition. Thinking back to those desired visitor outcomes or the goals for the exhibition, we thought that action, dialogue, and reflection were the most applicable here. So looking at how visitors were interacting with the exhibition, were they partaking in the participatory elements, were they interacting with each other in the space? Oop, skipping ahead too fast. Oh. No, not skipping ahead too fast. One of the reasons we picked this methodology is context. The Trust is a federal agency. We're not immune to bureaucracy, although we are innovative. There is an act called the Paperwork Reduction Act, which effectively limits our ability to collect information. We could ask up to one question of up to 9 people before we were involved in a lengthy bureaucratic review process. So that wasn't feasible within the time frame. So as a bureaucracy, as a federal agency, we're a little bit hampered by an act called the Paperwork Reduction Act. And it basically limits collection of information. The idea is that the government can't overly burden the public with reporting whatever you want to ask, whether that's the IRS wanting you to fill out 20,000 pages or us wanting to ask you 12 questions. So we got creative with indirect evaluation tools, with using data sources we already had at our disposal. But really what we were interested in is what I've stated so far, getting some baseline information about how visitors were using the gallery space to inform other evaluations of this particular exhibition, but also to develop tools as we are new to the exhibition universe. Very briefly, kind of in the universe of staffing, timing, and training, we're using in-house talent to the max, like Laura mentioned. None of us are professional evaluators. Winona Nelson, who's an exhibition intern with the Trust, took the lead in researching and developing the tools and methodology, and she's going to talk about that in detail. Our exhibition interns, Brianna is the other exhibition intern. They do all of the gallery work, so all of the shifts actually doing visitor observation. And then we have a collection specialist who has excellent database skills and is also a social scientist by training, so she's great with quantitative data analysis. We've done a pilot phase this fall. We did about a month of observations, 6 shifts a week, and Winona will get into that now. Take it away.
Hello. Thank you for going to the next slide. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the research, but then more about our tools and materials, our process, some of the ways we're going to analyze the data, and then just briefly some of the things we've already found out from our pilot. So we thankfully had the time to really develop each stage, which included spending a couple of months just on research. And one of the things that we found most useful was an hour webinar by Sarah Jane Harknett, who really gets into like nuts and bolts of how to do a timing and tracking study. So it's located on YouTube, so I would really, if you're interested, I would recommend watching it, because she can go into a lot more detail than I can right now. So next on to tools and materials. So our major tool is our tracking form, which we created on Microsoft Word. There's 6 sections that kind of make up this form. The top is just demographics, so how old we think they might be, but also things like weather and how that might affect their visit. Right below that, we have a table that has different codes that represent different actions the visitor might be taking. So did they pick something up? Did they photograph something? Are they listening to the dialogues? Below that, we have our floor plan. And using the group objects function on Microsoft Word made it really simple to build it and then to work with it as the form changed. Below to the side, we have a more info section for anything else you might think is important to add. Below the floor plan, we have a small section for gallery issues. So if some element isn't working, we can note that so we remember when it's not us looking at the form, but being entered into the database. And at the very bottom, we have like a place for the tracking number and our date and initials. And so our other tools include a clipboard, pencils, timing devices, and a sign that we place outside the exhibit, which you can see in the picture. We thought it was important to let visitors who were going into the exhibition space know that evaluation was occurring. So you can't miss it. I'm going to talk now a little bit about our process. So the first thing is we put out our sign, and then we talk to all staff and docents who are on the floor that an observational period is occurring. This way, if visitors approach them instead of us, they know what's going on. But it also means they don't come up to you and start talking, which might interfere with what you're trying to accomplish. So, sorry. And so the observation begins for us when someone crosses into the space. This does mean that we have people just using the exhibition space as a passageway, and they don't actually stop, but that's important information as well to note. And we focus on just tracking an individual and not a group, because you get more accurate information that way. So returning to the codes I mentioned previously, I'm not sure if you can see at the back, there's little X's and different letters around, and that X's mark a stop, and then the different letters, there's an L right here, which means that they're listening to one of the acoustic guides. So we note the time, and then we'll draw the arrows around so we can capture that directional flow. And capturing that directional flow, once we are converting the forms into information we could include in our database, was one of our big challenges. Our solution was to assign unique numbers for each element, and then you could enter those into the database in sequence of the visitor stops along with the actions and times. So that way you could still tell which path a visitor took, even if it is just now in a database. But we do also attach the form and then attach it to that information still, so you could go back and look. So this database, and we use Microsoft Access, also then can work as an archive for the study as well, as being able to do help with some of the analyses. Oh, and here's a picture of screen grab of one of the database that our collection specialist, Megan, put together. So as I said, so some of the analyses that we can do with the Microsoft Access is calculating which elements a percent of people stopped at, which is known as attraction power. And then we can also look at the percent of visitors that visit more than 51% of the elements in the exhibit, which is known as percent diligent visitor. And then also with the sweep rate index, it measures time and space in proportion to the size of the exhibit, which is really helpful for us since our main exhibit is much bigger, so it gives us a way to compare the two even though they're drastically different sizes. And especially the last two with the sweep rate index and the percent diligent visitor will be nice to compare to future exhibits as well to help figure out what works the best for us. And then I'm also going to quickly share some of the things that we have already learned. We've just finished our pilot phase, but some things have already become pretty clear. First, that people are using the side entrances a lot more than we expected. we kind of expect them to come in the front, they're kind of coming in through the back. While people do listen to the acoustic guides quite frequently, they're not listening to them as much as we hoped. And lastly, people spend a lot of time at the reflection cards. They'll spend 5-10 minutes sometimes just reading cards and talking then with other visitors about what they're reading and then about the exhibit as well, which has just been really great to see. And you'll hear more about the reflection cards in our analyses by Laura and Lacey. So some of the benefits that since we were able to have like a good chunk of time to do a pilot study, was that Brianna, who's the other exhibition intern, and I were really able to become comfortable with the process and methodology of timing and tracking. As was mentioned, none of us are evaluation experts, so it took a little time to feel comfortable. But it also allowed us to refine the methodology as new things came up. And when a visitor comes up to you and starts asking a historical question and how kind to deal with other people coming in as well. It also allowed us to adjust the form. The codes have changed quite a bit since the first iteration of the form. We used to have one discussion-based code, we now have 4. And lastly, it also allowed us time to make, in addition to changing the codes, the form became a lot more readable, and it became a lot easier to also enter it into our databases. It also allowed us to see what shifts were the most effective when we were able to observe the most people coming into the gallery, and to then now choose those shifts so we're using our time more effectively. And then Liz is going to come up and do a little bit more.
Thanks, Winona. So just very big picture to transition. One of the benefits for us, in addition to tracking and timing, falling within the constraints of the kinds of evaluation tools that are easy for us to use, it was also really low risk. That gave us time to experiment, as Winona mentioned, to try out different things. It allowed us to develop in-house talent, to pilot tools and processes, to improve them so that they'd be useful not only for this particular exhibition, but for our organizations going forward, and ultimately giving us some really interesting information about how visitors are using the space in ways that we didn't necessarily imagine, giving great background for other evaluation studies. And I'm going to turn it over at this point to Laura and Lacey to talk about our analysis of the reflection cards.
So you guys saw the image of the reflection cards hanging in the gallery, and we knew when we designed that into the exhibition that we were going to get some kind of rich-ish information, but we didn't really know what that was going to be. But we wanted to do something that would be more rigorous and somehow systematic to learn from it, and not just have a pile of cards that we kind of glanced at and took a guess at what it might mean. So we decided to invest in designing an analysis of these cards. So I'm going to give a little bit of more background, and then I'm going to turn it over to Lacey. So want to link the evaluation goals, again, back to the exhibition goals. We felt that the evaluation we were going to do would best get at the exhibition goals of understanding, perhaps, reflection, dialogue, empathy. So it did cover a lot of the bases, and I think action was sort of the one exhibition goal that we didn't think this study was going to help us learn much about. So the methodology that we used for this is called a thematic framework approach, which was a really big fancy word that we didn't know a whole lot about. We discovered this approach through Dr. Randy Roberts, who's the deputy director at the new Shrem Museum up in Davis and a faculty at JFK. Dr. Roberts did this analysis as part of her dissertation. And I think this kind of approach is used in many other kinds of environments. And so Dr. Roberts used it, in a museum context. And we thought it was just really, really an interesting and, again, systematic way of getting at important qualitative data. So we were really fortunate that Dr. Roberts was willing to work with us and advise us on how to design this and how to do this. So she's been part of our team. And the idea of this thematic approach is that the researcher is going to reflect deeply on the content, so on these cards, while consciously holding their own biases and their own judgments and experiences as they're doing it. So that's a really key piece, and Lacey's going to talk about what's involved in that. And then identifying key themes that emerge. So it's really about, what are the cards saying to us? What are they telling us? And that's different than what are our own thoughts and ideas about this exhibition and about these cards. So it's qualitative, but again, it's really systematic. And again, hopefully you'll see how that happens. And it really relies a lot on the ability of the researcher to use their creativity and their conceptual thinking to come up with these key themes. We wanted to use this methodology because we really wanted to get at, again, deeply the visitor experience and impact. And we wanted to really try and look at not just the cognitive experience, what information were they taking in and understanding, but what was their emotional experience? Were they moved in some way? And we felt that this approach could help us to do that. We also thought it would help us to get at the complexity, right? Because the whole exhibition is premised on the idea that this is a complex event that evokes complex feelings and ideas. And then lastly, while we certainly wanted to see if the goals we had for this exhibition were correct or not, were we actually getting there, we also wanted to know if things were coming up that we didn't anticipate, right? So this approach allows you to do both, because we had to be open to the idea that these cards were telling us something that we didn't know going into it. So in terms of the timing, this study was designed to be 4 months long. So we started in September, it's going to wrap up in December. And that's just sort of one wave of one set of cards. This could be done many more times or over a longer period of time, but we did it in 4 months. The team, there were 7 people involved in this project. One main researcher, who is Lacey, but also Liz and Winona and Brianna, Dr. Roberts, who I mentioned, and then Megan, who was really instrumental with the database piece. But again, this is all in-house. I don't think we spent any money out of our pockets, so that was exciting. And there was some training involved, and Dr. Roberts was really generous to spend a couple of hours with us, training us on this methodology, and we did a little bit of other informal learning on our own. And I'm now going to turn it over to Lacey, and she's going to take you through the details of this.
Hi, so I'll just walk you through what we did and what we're doing, and our step-by-step methodology is available to you in the Google Drive. So our data set was 197 cards that were posted in the exhibition from opening in April through September. You can see an example of an original card in the gallery here on the screen. Each card had a question, a response, and an option to self-identify your connection to Operation Babylift. In our study, we focused heavily on the process of establishing themes from the data. We utilized a triangulation approach to mitigate researcher bias and to introduce multiple perspectives So this approach involved 3 reviewers analyzing the data independently to establish initial themes in what we called phase 1 of the card analysis. Winona, Brianna, and myself were the card reviewers. And so each reviewer gained access to the reflection card database that had been generously built by Megan and the Presidio Trust. And then I copied the card responses from the database into a Word document so that we could print and cut physical copies of the data set. These physical copies indicated the question from the card, the response, and the unique identifier assigned to the card in the database. But it felt important at this point to facilitate a blind review in which the respondents' self-identified connection to Babylift was minimally obvious to the reviewer. However, many responses kind of explicitly stated their connection or even their name. So that wasn't exact, but it was helpful to have less text on our cards. So this was meant to kind of minimize minimize the clouding of our judgment of the individual respondent. Okay. So here you can see the tools we used, including the physical copies of the cards that I printed. Each reviewer did 2 initial read-throughs of the data, attempting to minimize analysis at first and just letting the data really wash over us. I think each read-through took me about an hour. Then beginning with the 3rd read-through, we were meant to begin noticing words, phrases, ideas, tones, feelings that were emerging as being common or particularly powerful within the data. Each of us kept a journal of our personal responses to the data, and we made note of our personal biases or judgments, and in addition to taking notes about the themes emerging on our physical sets of the cards. We were mindful of Dr. Roberts' idea that meaning was more significant to this process than actual words. And for this reason, we opted against coding our data according to the words being written. Our intention was allow themes to emerge from the data as much as possible, as opposed to having the reviewers pull the themes out. So each reviewer established themes in 3 words or less and accompanied those descriptions with longer reasoning and examples from the data in phase 1. I don't think you can see that very well, but that's an example of the database. After we established our themes, we transferred them to the database using an individual export for each reviewer. We added fields to our individual spreadsheet for each of our themes and titled each field with the short descriptor and our initials. Then the responses that corresponded to a certain theme were marked with an X in the themes field, so you can see that on the right with the X's. So then Megan was able to import our fields back into the database, so all of our themes will appear for each card record in the database. So in sharing our findings in group discussion, we found that while our themes differed, our experience with the data was fairly similar. Overall, the phase of this process took each reviewer about 10 hours. But Winona and Brianna were already much more familiar. We're already much more familiar. So with limited time and no prior experience, our themes were more like topics that required deeper analysis to make meaning of their significance in the exhibition. So this is phase 2, which is what I'm working on now as the lead researcher. I've been reading and rereading all 3 of our themes and doing research with what comes up for me, kind of in reading them, and then also what is coming out of the data. So I've been rereading the data with these themes in mind and just kind of doing it over and over again. And this is just an example of what I've come up with so far. Right now I have 7 themes, and these are 3 of the prominent ones. The next step in my project is to delve deeply into research questions that I've come up with out of the data, and also I'm looking at similar evaluation methods. And the output of my project will be an analysis report with the goals of presenting the visitor's experience with the exhibition from the reflection cards, informing future work of the organizations, and outlining our methodology, its benefits, and its limitations. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to wrap this up in 30 seconds. I know we're a little bit over time, and I just want to say, you know, Lacey has done an extraordinary job with a really complex kind of analysis, but we're already seeing the benefits of it, and I just really encourage you to talk to her if you have any interest in something like this, because we designed it in part so that it would be something that could be done over again with another kind of project in another institution. So again, it's still work in progress. Again, there's a lot of documents in the shared drive, including the step-by-step methodology and an overview of what we were just sharing. And please be in touch with us, with any of us, about any of these projects. We would love to hear from you. Thanks a lot.
All right, wonderful. So we are going to get into our really fun workshop aspect of things. So as you noticed, when Maya started out, she kind of gave an overview of some of these different types of things that we can figure out. And then the Presidio Trust and Adoption Museum project, you can see all the thought and effort that went into their workshop, into their studies and their designs. And we have yet to find out what the analysis is, but we're super excited to find out a little bit later on down the road. But doing evaluation is extremely important for a variety of reasons. It helps inform us about our programs, our exhibits, and there's many different styles and ways of doing things. Right now, you're sitting at tables that I think you self-identified to sit at. And what we're going to do is we're going to give you an opportunity to use some of these planning tools, some of these methods, and some of these ideas that you just heard about, and work together to think about what would that look like in your museum? What would that look like in your program or your exhibit or whatever it is that you're working on? So on your tables there is that big 8.5 by 14 sheet called the Study Design Worksheet. And what you're going to do with that is you are going to spend a few minutes just reading it over and checking it out, and it includes all of that stuff that Maya talked about and then you heard about in process with the Operation Babylift. And you can work on that and start to jot down some of your ideas. Now, if you don't have your own idea yet of what you want an evaluation project to be, that's okay. You have other people at your table, and I'm sure somebody there does. And so you're going to have an opportunity to spend the next, 5 to 7 minutes starting to just think about for yourself, what are my goals? What would that look like if I were to really think about the evidence? So work your way through that, and it's okay to talk to people, it's okay to work in groups. And you're going to have an opportunity to really think through that and to think about, okay, if I want to walk away from this workshop and have an idea of what I can maybe do, this will help you with that. No.